Staying with us as always. Well, in this hour, we always go very legal. That's what we do on Pro Bono Chambers. Yes, that happens every weekday right here on Human Rights Radio. Today is kind of a bit different. Yes, because we do not have the in-house lawyer right here today. However, we don't want the space to just be there empty. So I am here by myself. Yes, Ruth is my name, and I am no barrister. Trust me, I am not. However, from working alongside people like that and some research, I have a few things we'll share with you on Pro Bono Chambers today. Things that could be helpful, inciting as well, incisive. Okay. So today on Pro Bono Chambers, we'll just be going through some of these headlines, like who is breaching your human rights, what's a public authority under the Human Rights Act. You also find out private organizations and charities, and how do you know if an organization is carrying out a public function. I'll be telling you about that as well. When must a public authority follow the Human Rights Act? And what if your convention rights have been breached by a private organization or individual who is not a public authority? And etc., etc., etc. But then we'll focus on mainly these subheads that I have just read out to you. All right. So generally, human rights are, protected, and only public authorities must follow the Human Rights Act. Yes, public authorities also have to follow the human rights. This means that you can take action under the Human Rights Act if a public authority has breached your human rights. If a public authority has breached your human rights, you can take action. Now, that's why this question arises. What is a public authority? Well, the public authority is an organization that provides public functions. And here are examples of these organizations that provide public functions. There are government departments, courts and tribunals, local authorities, police, prison and immigration officers, schools, public prosecutors, and other organizations too that, are set up to carry out some of these services in the country. Now, these are examples of public authorities. Now, what about private organizations and charities? Now, private organizations or charities are public authorities if they carry out public functions, but then they must respect your human rights when they carry out their public functions. Now, examples of these companies that have been subcontracted to carry out a public function, like a security company running a private prison, for instance. Some housing associations, when they carry out some of their functions as, for instance, a social landlord as well. Private care homes, providing care on behalf of local authority. And then private hospitals too, that provide care for people. Now, how do you know if an organization is carrying out a public function? How would you know that? Now, it is for the courts to decide if something is a public function or there is no basis for that at all. Now, generally speaking, a public function is something that normally provides the public by the state, for instance, education, prisons, or health services. That's it. So if an organization carries out one of these activities on behalf of the state, they may be a public authority. Now, here are also examples of this. Now, these are examples of things to decide if a private organization is a public authority, then it will look at whether the organization is publicly funded, whether the organization is supervised by a state regulatory body, or exercising powers given to it by the law, taking the place of central or local government, providing a public service, whether this organization is acting in the public interest, and lastly, whether the organization is carrying out coercive powers devolved from the state. That's how, if an organization is carrying out a public function, you go through these, and if it is so that the organization is publicly funded, or that it is being supervised by a state regulatory body, or if it's carrying out coercive powers devolved from the state, then you would know that this organization is carrying out a public function. All right, we'll come back to this. We'll continue in a bit, but we have to go on a commercial break at this point. Do stay with us on Human Rights Radio 101.1 FM. I'll be right back. for staying with us on Human Rights Radio 101.1 FM. This beautiful Wednesday morning is 10:30 a.m. My name is Ruth, and yes, this is Probono Chambers. But if you were listening from the beginning, yep, it's obvious. In-house barrister is unavoidably absent today. However, I am here giving you a few tips on how you can know who is breaching your human rights. Yes, who is it that is breaching your human rights? We've been through a couple of stuff here. For instance, what is a public authority under the Human Rights Act? And I told you a public authority could either be government departments, local authorities, police, prison and immigration officers, public prosecutors, and on and on and on. We also talked about private organizations and charities. And how do you know if an organization is carrying out a public function? Okay, so you know if an organization is carrying out a public function if the organization is publicly funded, if it has been supervised by a state regulatory body, if it's exercising powers given to it by the law, and if it is providing a public service or acting in the public interest. Now, when must a public authority follow the Human Rights Act? Well, the public authorities are also public sector organizations. That is the police or schools or some hospitals. They must follow these human rights acts in everything that they do. I mean, even if it's not a public function, it means that they must also follow the acts when they do things of a private nature, like, for example, making employment contracts. Now, private organizations only have to follow Human Rights Act when they carry out their public functions. Okay? Now, what if your convention rights have been breached by a private organization or individual who is not a public authority? Well, the Human Rights Act says that courts should consider human rights in all cases they hear. Yes, the Human Rights Act says the courts should consider human rights in all cases that they hear. This is because there is also a public authorities and so must follow the human rights. So they are a public authority, that is, courts are public authorities, and all courts must apply the law in a way that is compatible with human rights. It means that they must interpret and give effect to the law in a way which is as close to the Human Rights Act as possible. They must do this in all cases they hear, even if they do not involve a public authority at all. All right, so that's basically it on how to know who could possibly breach your human rights. These public as well as private organizations, as we also have them listed here, these are avenues or agencies whereby your rights could be breached. And of course, the next thing would be, if that happens, where do you go? Who do you go to? Who's the first person you would talk to? Well, of course, you may want to speak with your lawyer at that point, and then you know exactly what steps to do. Well, on Pro Bono Chambers, that's basically what we do here. But like I said earlier, unfortunately, we do not have our in-house barrister, so we'll not be getting those legal advice, at least for today. But hopefully, tomorrow we get barrister here so that you can call in with your questions, with your concerns, with every other thing that you may have on your mind that has to do with legal matters. Yes, it's very legal, and you know what, they will be able to provide free legal information, advice for you, and that will definitely be useful for you. So stay with us on Human Rights Radio and keep listening. The infomercial will be coming up in the next couple of minutes, and many other programs, so do stay right here on Human Rights Radio 101.1 FM.